core of my message was how important words are. And I think that a lot of the time we're talking about these huge bureaucratic systems like COP to just be lip service. But actually within the words that they give is a lot of importance, and a lot of the text that they write in these UN documents is a matter of life and death, how 1.5 can be so different from 2 degrees warming. And so that was really my message, and I was so proud to be able to tell it with a Samoan proverb.
We loved, and the way that you framed it and made every Samoan person cry even more, you know, with alanga upu ele e palan maa ele palan upu, but also the framing of the phrase that's been the catch cry of we are not drowning, we are fighting. Can you just tell us why that's so pivotal to you guys as the Pacific Climate Change Warriors?
I think it's so important to turn away from this toxic idea that Pacific Islanders are victims of climate change, and that we're just waiting in our islands and hoping that someone will save us. And I think that type of framing and storytelling does a huge disservice to the resilience of Pacific people who live within the climate crisis. And we are literally not drowning, we are fighting. You know, we have mamas in Kiribati building seawalls. We have families in the Vaisingano River constantly rebuilding their houses, teaching their kids how to adapt to floods. You know, we have those in Melanesia replanting indigenous trees to help their shorelines become stronger. And I think by saying that we're fighting the climate crisis, it really does justice to our stories as Pacific people who are every day waking up and showing resilience, and we're not just victims.
And it makes it active, doesn't it? It shows the action of it and the weight of the words, as you say. Hey, Bibi, tell us, what was the experience like of standing as a young Tamaitai Samoa in front of the leaders of the world and delivering that message?
Oh, I was so proud to stand in on behalf of our young Pacific people. And I got told the day before that I could bring one person, because we're not allowed to leave our bags alone, because it's like a security threat if our bags are left alone. So they say, hey, you can bring one person, because it's ticketed, the World Leaders Summit. And so I took Moana Shrinky, who's one of our Pacific Climate Warriors here with us, and we sat backstage. And when things were starting to begin, these people just started walking past us, and we're thinking, okay, who are these people? And it was Joe Biden and his wife, and John Kerry. And Joe Biden made direct eye contact to us because we were the only ones backstage. And he smiled and he waved at us because I think he recognized the flowers. And I think that's when it really hit me, and it hit us how huge this stage was that I was getting to stand on.
And Bibi, what was the reaction to what you said? How much impact do you think it had? We saw all the cutaways of, you know, of Boris Johnson and David Attenborough. What do you feel like the reaction was?
I felt like I was able to connect with them, and I feel like I gave myself the room to just breathe and to really have faith in my words, coincidentally enough. And I knew I only had 2 minutes, and I really wanted to make it count. And I think that I was able to make it count by sharing my culture with people. It's really rare to have our indigenous languages spoken at these events. So it was like prideful for me to be able to share that part of Samoan culture with them.
Wonderful, because you know, you hope that these emotional stories aren't just going to be sort of part. I mean, that they're going to actually have an impact on the decision making. Can you just tell us about some of the challenges that you guys see as the Pacific delegates, and you've come with the Marshall Islands delegate, eh? What are some of the things that the Pacific delegation is really hoping to achieve?
You know, one of the things that's been really hard this time around is the access to COP because of COVID, because of restrictions and borders being closed. And so there is a little bit of that fear I've been hearing a lot of Pacific Islanders talk about around COP of not having enough people there to push the agenda. And so at COP21, which everyone kind of sees as the successful COP, I believe that it wouldn't have been successful if it wasn't for the Pacific leaders that stayed behind, made sure 1.5 was in the document, and really pushed ambition. And I think a lot of climate activist groups and groups who are more concerned about the lives of people than the cost of the economy to be green, really rely on Pacific leaders because they know that we're the ones who are always showing climate leadership. And so there is a little bit of fear because not a lot of us are here. That
Four of the prime ministers, isn't there?
There's only 4. I was reading the whole list, and I could only see Palau, and then Bani Marama's here, and there were no other ones. And it's scary. We're the biggest ocean in the world, and we only have 4 of those leaders here. And so that's a little bit of a concern, but hopefully the delegations that are here are able to still push the envelope.
What does the delegation from the Marshall Islands, one of the lowest lying, one of the biggest impacted by climate change in the Pacific, what is forefront of your delegation's mind to achieve?
Yeah. So in the Pacific Climate Warriors, we're really lucky to be taken under the wing of the Marshall Island delegation. And they're really the only delegation that I've been able to have a talk with, because we're really lucky to have a dinner with their minister a couple of nights ago. And a big thing for them is finance. So how are they able to get the money that they're owed, that the Pacific is owed, to be able to adapt to climate change? And that's a big part of what they're pushing for at this COP. And I think what a lot of Pacific Islanders are looking at is how do we get that climate debt? I know people call it climate aid, but I really feel like it's climate debt.
Again, see, the words are very important, aren't they? And tell us about how you're feeling it's going with the conversation so far and the commitment so far from the big countries around cutting carbon emissions.
So it's been day 2, and I still feel like it's not as ambitious as we need it to be. The conversation is still very behind. So there's very nice words being said again, like very pretty words, but no concrete targets, no targets that are close enough for us to be able to keep below that 1.5 threshold. And so I feel like things are still moving slow, and I really hope things start to speed up and ambition starts to go a bit higher.
Because is it usually sort of towards the end of the conference that the hard decisions are being made? Like I know in the Paris COP, it wasn't really till the final day that it went down from 2 degrees to 1.5, for example. Do you feel like, where's the hope in this baby? What are you hoping for, in terms of what can happen in a week?
You know what? I'm really hoping that the voices inside and the voices outside can push the action that we need and the text that we need to be ambitious, because there's been protests every day outside. They had a group outside chanting COP26, we're watching you. And so a lot of people have been asking me like, oh, how do you think that big leaders will listen to small Pacific Islands? And I said, well, if we're not alone, if we have allyship from citizens of these big countries, we can get their governments to listen because these are their voters. And so I think that's where the hope is. It's not in politicians, it's in the people.
How important has it been for you guys to be physically visible? Like, I like the mechanisms you're using, like the say, have your say, the traditional Pacific way, because, like it just, do you feel like has that been a deliberate strategy for you guys to increase visibility and voice?
Yes, so we built a whole campaign around Have Your Say, and using the visuals of the flowers to be able to talk about climate change and have our voice. But I think it's so important for us to be here because we need to have Pacific voices in the conversation. And I think a great example of that is one of our Pacific climate warriors, Joseph Zane Sikulu. So he lives in Australia, but he's from Tonga. He spoke on the BBC debate tonight, the Scotland BBC debate. And there was this conversation about changing livelihoods. And so the conversation was based around what would change in people's lives if we cut emissions. So like people will have to start taking the bus, people will have to start insulating their houses. So talking about like those lifestyle changes, but no one was talking about the lifestyle changes that were happening in the Pacific. And so having Joseph there completely changed the question because he was then able to pull it back and say, well, you're talking about taking the bus. We're talking about losing lives, moving our families. It's completely different conversation we're having. And, you know, it's not like we're saying, oh, well, if we don't change and lower emissions, we'll just stay at this normal. Our lives are going to change whether or not. And so it's better to change in a good way and change for the betterment of the planet.
Fantastic, because I think maybe that's what's missing is painting those realistic pictures. And, you know, the contrast between people talking about things in the Western world that are a minor inconvenience compared to things in the Moana world that are survival. You know, so that's wonderful. Hey, I just want to say it's so inspiring, the work that the young delegation is doing, because you guys, you know, are our future, as everyone keeps putting on your shoulders. But it's just so inspiring to all of us that you're so articulate and that you've been able to be so effective in putting these messages across, you know, with Joseph Talanoa last night on BBC. And, you know, the world has seen, you know, you've been on so much media in the mainstream. So we're so proud of you and the Pacific delegation there and the wonderful work you're doing. We'll let you go because we know you need to go to sleep now.
Oh, thank you.
And, thank you for the update and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of COP26 and have your say, girl.
Yes, thank you. I will.